like to get these things started promptly. Welcome to this month's State Electronic Records Initiative webinar, which focuses on attracting and retaining great talent. I'm Bonnie Weddle. I am the chair of the SERI Initiatives Education and Programming Subcommittee. And just to remind you, SERI, the State Electronic Records Initiative, was established in 2011 to focus on improving management, preservation, and access to state and territorial government electronic records in all 56 states and territories. SERI's areas of activity center upon increasing awareness of electronic records challenges and opportunities, identifying best practices and practical tools that state archives can use, and developing educational opportunities for the state archives community and for the broader archives and records management community. Today's webinar is one of those educational offerings, and it's the first in a slate of several webinars that we'll be presenting in 2018. We're still in the process of nailing down dates and presenters, so stay tuned. We'll be publicizing future webinars shortly. I also need to tell you that SERI's current work is partially supported by a generous grant from the Institute for Museum and Library Services. And just a little bit about today's presenters. Ann Eckerson is the former executive director of CoSA and currently serves as the council's communication coordinator. From 2014 to 2017, she represented CoSA on an IMLS-funded project exploring leadership training and development among the library, archives, and museum sectors. Prior to joining CoSA, Ann was director of the Museum Association of New York, where she led an initiative looking at next-generation leadership and succession planning in the state's museums. Her work on these initiatives resulted in the book Leadership Matters, which she co-authored with Joan Baldwin in 2013. She and Baldwin are revising the book this year, and it is part of a publication series at the American Association for State and Local History. Cathy Popovitch is the supervisor of the publications unit at the Illinois State Archives. She began working in the archives in 2014 as a records archivist intern and became a records archivist in 2015. She currently writes, edits, and distributes state archives publications and is in charge of the archives' online descriptive inventory. She also serves as the Archive Chief Grants Manager and Illinois State Historical Records Advisory Board's Deputy Coordinator. Prior to joining the State Archives, Cathy worked as a librarian and records specialist in the private sector. She has a bachelor's degree in history from Millikan University and a master's degree in library and information science from the University of Illinois. Cathy joined the CoSA Education and Training Committee, which produced the Attracting and Retaining Great Talent white paper in 2017. Alan Ramsey joined the Connecticut State Library staff in 2010 as Government Records Archivist. He became Assistant State Archivist in 2013 and oversees the State Archives' acquisition, arrangement, description, and preservation of state and local government records and non-government records of enduring value pertaining to the history and heritage of Connecticut. He was appointed a member of the Connecticut State Historical Records Advisory Board in 2017. Alan holds a BA in History from Winona State University, an MA in History from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, and a master's in library and information science from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. He obtained the Society of American Archivists Digital Archives Specialist Certificate in 2013, and Alan is also a member of CoSA's Education and Training Committee. And just a little bit about today's agenda. We're going to be talking about attracting and retaining great staff, as the title of this webinar states, and why it's particularly important in our current time. Also, what makes an employee, quote unquote, great, how state archives can recruit and retain talented employees, and finally, the implications of this report in regards to staff who do work with electronic records. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ann. You'll just give me a moment to transfer control of the slides here.
Thanks very much, Bonnie. I'm delighted to be here today to talk a little bit about, give you some background and context for the white paper and how it came to be, and then also talk a little bit about some ways that CoSA is thinking about how it can advance this idea of attracting and retaining great talent. The white paper was written by members of CoSA's Education and Training Committee, two of whom are on this webinar with me today. And it is a project that has been on the drawing board, was on the drawing board for about 3 years. It was partly spurred by the increasing number of retirements that we were seeing. And since 2013, 12 state archivists have retired or left their positions. So that's something, you know, that doesn't happen every day of the week, so we were taking notice of that. In 2016, I chaired a CoSA SAA joint meeting session on next generation leadership in archives and had the benefit of listening to a number of graduate students and emerging professionals and professionals who've been in the field for about 10 or 15 years talk about leadership in general and their leadership in particular. And all of that sort of combined together to think about how we wanted to articulate the challenges and the rewards of making a career in state archives. But we also wanted to underscore the skills and the attributes that all archives need in their staff as they embrace the expanding demands of government and public expectations. So as a professor of public history recently told her students on a trip to the New York State Archives earlier this year, these jobs no longer afford you the option of sequestering yourself in an office all day long working with just records. Today's archivists wear many hats, and they need to be comfortable interacting in teams, both internal and external teams. They need to be comfortable interacting with the public and with a vast variety of stakeholders. We hope that the white paper and its culminating agenda, which we'll talk about towards the end of this webinar, will assist both individuals and agencies in meeting professional development needs. We'll get graduate students and emerging professionals thinking about employment in the public sector, and hopefully we'll provide direction for all of us to think more deeply about attracting and retaining talented and forward-thinking workforces. I think the bottom line for us is that staff is both an investment as well as a cost. And there is a lot of work that we can do, that we need to do, both individually and collectively, to ensure that our investment reaps positive and lasting rewards. So with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Cathy Popovitch. Wherever you are, Cathy.
Hello.
Hi. I'm trying to give you control of the slides, which I'm not being too successful at, I have to say.
Oh, there we go. I got it.
Okay, good. All right.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, Ann. First, to start off, since we're talking about attracting and retaining great talent today, we thought it was important to define, well, what does great talent look like? What are we talking about when we talk about great talent? So we broke this down into hard skills and soft skills. Starting with the hard skills, the great archivist, obviously, needs to have a solid understanding of basic archival principles and best practices. This includes areas of selection and appraisal, arrangement and description, preservation, different reference services, and really how all of those different areas work together. And in an increasingly digital world, basic understanding of born digital records, digitization, and the different technologies associated with records management and archives is also necessary. But beyond basic archival knowledge, and really depending upon the archivist's assigned role, the successful archivist may have greater technical expertise in a certain area or specialization. So pertinent to SERI, for example, an electronic records archivist should know more about current best practices for ingesting, storing, and preserving electronic records. And then finally, as a government employee, the archivist should also be familiar with government organization, and that's on various levels, state, local, federal. And this is really important for archivists to be able to properly appraise records and also to comply with laws and regulations as they apply to government records. Moving on to the soft skills, really there are innumerable soft skills that someone who is a great archivist should have, but we've kind of decided to just focus on just a few. The first is adaptability. You know, with ever-changing budgets, seemingly ever-shrinking budgets, changing staff numbers, changing strengths and skills of staff, and shifting priorities within agencies, the ability to adapt to those changes is really essential. And it's important to note, too, that this includes reacting to change as well as being proactive and anticipating what might be coming down the pike. So similarly, archivists, the great archivist needs to be flexible. We give an example in the white paper about the archivist at the Connecticut State Archives who spends a few hours each week doing reference for the history and genealogy section in the state library, and then in return, a reference librarian from the state library with archival training schedules time to process state archives records. So having the ability to be flexible in your everyday tasks and sharing your skills across different departments like that can really help us do more with less. And then great archivists must be able to communicate clearly and effectively. This includes communication with your coworkers and colleagues to efficiently manage daily tasks and to tackle bigger projects. That includes communication with the public to provide great customer service, communication with different agencies in order to build trust and build a good working relationship with those agencies. And then also having the communication skills to be able to advocate effectively for the relevance of archives with different users. So why is this an important issue for state and territorial archives? Well, we have some statistics listed here. The first one shown is from a University of Michigan School of Information Employment report that was from, I believe, yes, 2016. And that found that only 5% of program graduates are working in government archives. Similarly, a U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics report from May of 2016 found that federal and state governments are at the bottom of industries with the highest level of employment for archivists. And then a review of the Society of American Archivists job listings that we did in November of 2017, where we were putting this white paper together, it showed that only 10% of job listings represented government archives. So all of this goes to illustrate that government archives face a significant challenge of attracting new and talented staff. I don't think I need to go into great detail about why government archives are important. I think I'd be preaching to the choir a little bit. But we do play a significant role in government accountability and openness, and it's essential that we preserve these records and that we make them as accessible as possible. But unfortunately, our work is often overlooked or undervalued, and we are constantly expected to do more with less. So keeping that in mind, having great talent on staff who can do more with less is essential to meeting the mandate and to providing the services that we are expected to provide. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Anne.
Okay. All right. Let me move to the next slide. Thanks, Cathy.
You're welcome.
So I think that what Cathy has touched upon, some of that leads directly to a lot of the challenges that we're all facing, and I'm sure that this list that you see here is probably pretty obvious to most of you, if not all of you. we've talked a little bit about the fact that this sector is small, that there's only about 1,200 full-time equivalent employees that are working in state archives across the nation. And it doesn't grow a whole lot. It's shrunk a whole lot within the last, maybe 10, 15 years. Perhaps somebody else can, provide some more specific information about the shrinking capacity, but it's been over a long time, and a lot of state archives haven't regained higher levels of or former levels of employment just because there's not the money there any longer. So our most recent survey, we do a biennial survey of archives and records management programs, and our most recent one is from 2016-17, so the information is from 2016, and that's now a very small uptick in the number of employees or hires, but small is good in an environment where often it's going in the opposite direction. So it's a sector that grows slowly, and it's, I would dare say, largely related to the fact that it's funding, and that funding constraints exacerbate staffing levels. Archives budgets are tied to a state's financial health, and although we know that and we also know that the funding of all state archives represent about 0.5% of all state expenditures. So really, really tiny. And many states grapple with restrictions on updating job descriptions and job titles, and that makes finding the right applicants for the right jobs really difficult. For example, some states don't have job titles or descriptions addressing digitization or electronic records management. So they're really struggling to try and fit round pegs into square holes and that kind of thing.
Right. Alan, I would add to that, that's like in the case of Connecticut here, we cannot change our job titles, so ours are pretty generic, like librarian 1, so it's tough to, highlight what exactly we're looking for. We're trying to change some of that, but that's very difficult with regulations, policies, and collective bargaining in the state. So.
Yes, and I'm sure that Connecticut is not alone in that challenge. While salaries and benefits may be better or more stable than jobs in the nonprofit sector, again, state finances over the long term have eroded, or they've held compensation packages level for many years. Likewise, smaller staffing structures also mean a lot less opportunity for advancement. And again, back in the day when some archives maybe had double the staff they have now, there might have been more opportunity to move up or make lateral moves. And now that just doesn't happen so much anymore. States often struggle when a staffer leaves of being able to fill that position. Sometimes the position's eliminated, or sometimes just the struggle to try and fill open positions takes a very long time. Archives in general don't hold a very visible place within most state governments. They're sometimes tucked into departments that you wouldn't even associate with them, such as administration or finance. And so there's a general lack of visibility not only in the government sector, but I would say externally as well. I think, I've heard people say that the public can't even pronounce the word archives. They're much more familiar with libraries, but when it comes to archives, those are kind of mysterious things. And people, I think, generally don't have a good sense of what archives do and the role that they play in society today. Lack of succession planning. We've had archives report to us that turnover of staff is running anywhere between 20% and 80%. Now that's a big spread, I know, but the fact that turnover is a fact of life, and for some archives it's happening at a very rapid pace. And of course what this ultimately means, besides losing staff, is that there's a loss of institutional knowledge and very little provision for any kind of overlap of incoming and outgoing staff, so that information is just lost. And the last challenge that we think is more widespread maybe than we might consider is the fact that the workforce lacks diversity. It remains overwhelmingly white, and we do have some bright spots happening out there, one of which is the Society of American Archivists and the Association of Research Libraries Mosaic program, which is really helping to attract diverse candidates into the field, and that's really exciting. So let me just move on here to some more bright spots, and I've just written here the names of 3 states that we do highlight in the report, and I'll give you just a brief synopsis of some of the things that they do, and then Cathy and Alan can jump in here. But Arkansas, I think not unlike a lot of state archives, is working closely with their state universities' public history programs to recruit interns and volunteers. They're making a concerted effort to let those programs know about government archives functions and get students involved. They attend college job fairs also. And on the job description, job title front, Arkansas has been trying to better understand how to work within the existing HR rules in an effort to change or adapt language, job titles, whatever it might be, so that they can recruit the talent that they need. In Connecticut, Connecticut's working to attract young audiences with the hope that if somebody gets the archives bug early, it might lead to a college education that will lead them into an archives position. Alan, do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, Ann, I can speak a little bit to that. So we are a partner in the National History Day competitions here. Many of our staff, including myself, volunteer to be Regional History Day judges. We also attend a lot of their workshops throughout the year to get our publications out there, what our resources are. In fact, when we first started, a lot of teachers didn't even know that we were a resource, which was a really big thing to change, and we've been working towards changing that. We had I think it was about a year ago, we had teachers in as part of a History Day instructional workshop to actually be able to actually give them a tour, go through the stacks, look at collections, get an idea of what's here. So. And of course, students. We always get schools that bring groups in. Actually, they'll start coming in soon to dig really deep into archives and special collection materials to enhance their topic for the theme. So that's one area where we've tried to focus more on.
Great, thanks. And at the Illinois State Archives, one of the things that they do that we highlighted in the report was a 1-year paid internship that really allows an intern to gain a greater depth and variety of experiences at the archives. And Cathy, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. I was actually hired on as an intern, and it's a one-year program. You work with records management, reference, conservation, and you kind of get to do all of it over the course of the year. And you're doing real work. It's not just grunt work. When I was in conservation, I got to humidify old documents, which was terrifying to me. But it's a good hands-on experience, and it gives the intern an idea of what kind of work you could be expected to do there if you were hired on later, and then it gives the director and the staff at the archives a chance to see what you have to offer as well.
Right. I want to put the word out to everybody on the webinar that we would love to hear about your bright spots. I think what we need is more examples of what you all are all doing in terms of attracting and retaining talent, and that we have an opportunity to become a forum to share those experiences with one another and to learn from each other. So, you know, please send them along. If you want to jot some ideas down into the chat box, please do that too. We're always looking for good ideas to be able to pass around. So I'm now going to pass the ball back to Cathy here, maybe. I'm not very good at doing this. Let's see if it works.
There we go.
You got it?
I got it.
Okay.
All right. So to end our white paper, we included an action agenda for the different stakeholders. And we just give some recommendations for next steps or best practices related to attracting and retaining great talent. So I'll just go through some of them. For individuals, know yourselves, be honest, know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and then follow up on that. Follow up by seeking out opportunities to sharpen your skills, whether that's through formal professional development courses or for volunteering for an assignment within your institution. That will be an opportunity for you to learn a new skill. Be an advocate for your training and professional development within your agency. Advocate for yourself as well as your team and your department. Seek out mentorships, again, either within your agency or through other professional organizations. And conversely, volunteer to mentor others. Volunteer to support those who are new to the field. And then encourage your grad programs to offer training to alumni and encourage your professional associations to offer professional development opportunities. For agencies, share what you can. Share job descriptions, different recruiting methods, salary benefits comparisons. Where possible, provide opportunities for internships or other kinds of partnerships with your agency. Work with iSchools in your area or even online programs and professional associations such as SAA to promote government archives as a career path. Develop strategies for measuring your recruitment programs. Just see what's working, see what's not working, and try to improve on your recruitment. Support your staff and nurture them by creating individual development plans and succession plans, and then also support cross-discipline experimentation to encourage your staff to learn and expand their current skill set. And for iSchools and graduate schools, seek out and establish state archives internship opportunities for students, and really just try to build relationships with the state archives. Call on them to make presentations or give tours and act as mentors to students. Try to become more interdisciplinary on campus and seek to build partnerships and relationships with you know, law, public policy programs that will help to develop archivists who are trained for government work. And also, and I think this is really important, and I think Anne kind of touched on this earlier too, is to acknowledge the emotional labor. It's not enough anymore to just know archival and records management practices, but there's a lot of communicating and relationship building with records creators, the public, and your colleagues. And students who will be entering the field soon need to know about those kinds of skills that will be expected of them. Okay, and Anne, I believe we're coming back to you.
Yep. So there's a big role here for CoSA too, we think, and the Education and Training Committee is anxious to really kind of dig into this even more and work on some specific strategies. We know that one of the things that we can do to be helpful is to continue to gather and publish data about the workforce and the state of the workforce. And even though we do that in our biennial survey of archives and records management, there may be opportunities along the way to do surveying or focus groups or however we may collect research and data on specific aspects that you, our members, iSchools, graduate students may want us to do. And so if you've got some thoughts for us regarding research and data, please let us know. We will do what we can to try and incorporate that into our ongoing research work. And we're going to try very hard to, turn that around and turn it back to you so you have concrete information to work with. Fostering ways to reach younger and more diverse professionals. I think that is something that CoSA needs to be doing all the time. We all need to be doing it all the time, certainly. I mentioned the Mosaic program, the SAA-ARL partnership. There may certainly well be other opportunities that can rise to the surface through collaboration between CoSA and other professional associations, our allied associations and organizations. We're just kind of scratching the tip of the iceberg here, I think, and we're not sure where it could take us. But again, if you have ideas for us, if you want to be involved with this, please speak up, let us know, and we're going to want to work with you. Partnering with iSchools to promote careers in government. We heard from the director of MLIS program recently who said, yes, if you want to, if CoSA wants to put on a webinar for my graduate students, we would love that. And so, we're thinking, okay, can we do something like that? Well, you all can do that too with the programs that you have relationships with, but certainly CoSA can do that or could help you do that too if you need that kind of help. So we're thinking about ways of how to do more promotion. Advocating for addressing long-term vacancies, particularly in the state archivist position, because that's really where CoSA has its critical mass, and we have done that. We've done that in the past. We did that fairly recently, not all that long ago, with the state of Kentucky, which had a long-term vacancy after Barbara Teague retired from there, and so CoSA weighed in on that. And we've done that with at least one other state that I can't remember the name of, but it's not important. It's just that we can bring that to bear on the job market or the workforce situation in states. And another thing that we're thinking about could be really helpful is to form some sort of an affinity group of those of you who are already working on these issues or those of you who want to start working on these issues. Let's get together and talk. Let's figure out a way to make that happen so that we can gather information and we can share it and we can work together towards tackling some of these issues. So those are a few of the things on the action agenda for CoSA. We hope that you spend time with the white paper. The agenda, I think, is one of the best pieces of it, and it comes at the end of the report, but there's a little bit of something for everybody in that agenda, we hope. So right now, I think we're done, and I can turn it back to Bonnie. Is it you, or is it somebody else? Or maybe it's not anybody else. It's Alan.
Okay.
All right.
So,
I'll give you the control here.
Yeah. So just to forewarn everybody, I don't have slides. I'm just going to comment very briefly on the implications in regards to attracting and retaining electronic records and digital preservation staff. I'll be using some of my experiences as examples just to get some ideas out there. And the MDSA Staffing for Effective Digital Preservation Report, which was issued last fall, and Carol Koosman gave a really good presentation at Best Practices Exchange on it, so I'm not going to duplicate that, but I'm just going to highlight a few things from that report that I think we need to keep in mind when we look at digital preservation staffing. And I'm going to put a link to to that in the chat box, so everyone can get to that report. It's worth a read. Even if you read the executive summary, it's worth a read. So also, we haven't in Connecticut, just so I'm up front here, we haven't hired any electronic or digital preservation staff, but we're working towards that. We actually got an increase in our fee last session, so we will be working towards that. So I look at all of the job descriptions out there, and of course this white paper will be useful towards working towards that, and the NDSA report, which has a nice little area about qualifications. What's at stake is if you don't have the staff to, or the ability to attract and then retain staff to do digital preservation and electronic records management work, we'll end up losing a whole segment of the historical record. And I think we all know that, so as Cathy mentioned earlier, I'm not going to go through all that, but I just wanted to give a really quick recap of sort of what's at stake by not trying to attract this talent or working towards ways of finding that talent. And I just wanted to go through some of the hard skills, looking at the hard skills and soft skills area real quick. And I know I had already sort of commented on a little bit of this, but in addition to knowing the basic archival principles and best practices, the person needs to be able to have training or know something about electronic records. So, for example, here we've been doing a lot with less, or as the state librarian recently said, less with less. Our budgets have decreased by over a third in under 5 years. So that's a lot and of course the demand has not gone down. Demand has gone up, and in fact, even more so in electronic records. So one approach we've taken is to train our existing staff. So that's myself and 2 other staff members and a couple staff members in the public records area on sort of the basic concepts. So we at least can start to do something, doing something better than nothing. This has been very supportive from the upper level of management, from the state librarian and including the state library board, who was actually impressed that we've gone through all this training and continue to do training through things like SERI and other programs out there. And it's also vital for our librarians. I'm in an agency where we've got librarians, and they deal with public documents. And how do you preserve that information that's all digital? And so we do a lot of cross-collaborative work. What do I know? From my knowledge to their knowledge. Technical expertise. Again, we realized early on, and some of you have probably heard this before, that we would never be able to hire the levels of staffing to even take on a digital preservation repository. So we have been working with the University of Connecticut libraries to continue our infrastructure development on digital preservation services in the Connecticut Digital Archive because, as I said, we will never get the staffing we need. As much as we may raise our fees and all that, we'll never catch up to that. Another example of technical expertise is a few months ago, the Secretary of State's office here was their commercial recording division was going through a lean process, which is mapping out a process for recordings. And so staff, having had that basic knowledge, was able to go in that meeting to talk about the electronic records components, but then when it came to technical, because I've had a bit more training in it, I was called in to answer some specific questions. So even having 1 or 2 people you can go to for technical expertise within your agency for your state is often useful. And I was able to walk the business through sort of the differences between PDF and PDFA and the drawbacks and all that, and I won't go into that. That's a whole other webinar. But at least draw them through what are the options there, and having some knowledge about that. And they were really much more at ease after our meeting because they were really not sure what to do. And of course, what are you going to mandate and all that sort of things. Understanding government organization is very important, both paper and electronic records wise. Being able to know, especially electronic, as we enter, we've been doing a lot of enterprise level work, and so things move from one agency to another agency electronic, and sort of knowing how that all sort of sits together is useful. Of course, soft skills, adapting to changing roles, which has been, some in the agency has been tough because we've dealt in a lot of paper. Now we're trying to have them take on electronic records roles or electronic publication roles. Again, drawing on a broad knowledge base. And, of course, continuing education, which, again, our upper management's been very supportive of and goes out of the way to try to find a little bit of money here and there. One thing under flexibility that I really wanted to kind of talk about was, of course, sharing expertise and cross-training and also finding ways to, in retaining staff, sort of alleviating burnout from allowing some flexibility in the sense of not always doing the same projects or things day after day. Sometimes that's necessary and is important, but sometimes changing things up refreshes and actually opens possibilities that maybe you haven't thought about. And then, of course, communication is key, and I think we've been through a lot of that. I wanted to quickly mention some of the a few of the findings in the NDSA report on staffing, which I put the link up in the chat box. Again, I would urge everyone to check that out if you're not done so already. There's a lot of good information, analysis, and thoughts for the future of the digital preservation staffing. They did a survey back in 2012, and then they just did this one in 2017. And I just want to kind of quote from the executive summary real quick here. One of the main focuses of the survey is on staffing levels. In response to these questions related to staffing levels, organizations report an average of 13.6 full-time equivalents, FTEs. So think about that, 13.6 people for electronic records and digital preservation staffing, compared to 11.4 in 2012. But most of the respondents to the survey said they would double that number to 27.5 full-time equivalents. So that, again, that in most states probably will never happen. And so trying to find ways of either partnering, collaborating, or training existing staff is going to be vital. And again, retaining those staff, being open to continuing education and things of those nature for digital preservation staff is just as important as other areas in the archival field. So I'm going to leave it at that. I won't go through all the report stuff because there's a lot of information there. So I'm going to pass it back to Bonnie. And
Alan, I'll just add, this is Ann, that in our 2016-17 Archives and Records Management Survey, we saw a decline, even though there was an uptick in the number of FTEs, full-time equivalents, there was a decline, and I don't recall by how much, in the number of people who held the title Electronic Records Archivist. So
yeah, I don't remember
overall staffing's up, but that particular job title is down. And do you have any thoughts about why that might be? Is it because the job title has changed, or is it because now every staff is expected to have some level of competency in electronic records management?
Right. So in the 133 responses in the NDSA survey, and 11% of that was government entities, so that could be local, county, state, federal. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, in there, the training existing staff from 2012 to 2017 went down. And so I don't know if that translated over the state or if we're, again, doing the more with less and saying we just got to do it this way. Also, there's a lot of different titles. They found in the report that catalogers, metadata analysts were still high. Sometimes they're called digital archivists. That wasn't as high. That had only bumped up a little bit. But there's a whole list of different titles that were as options in the survey. Mm-hmm. So from policy analysts to electronic records archivists to format specialists, workflow specialists. So
so they're going by a lot of different titles.
I think, yeah,
and therefore it's hard to track.
Right, and I think there could be, again, it could be that the government sector is still sticking to sort of trying to train and hire depending on your circumstances. But it was interesting that the training had gone, the training for existing staff had gone down, and the hiring specialized staff had gone a little bit up from 2012 to 2017 in their report. So,
Yeah, I think another reason for that may be, I know of 4 or 5 government electronic records archivists who took positions at various state archives fresh out of school, stayed in place for 2 or 3 years, and then took jobs in the private sector where the compensation is significantly higher.
Mm-hmm.
So that may also be.
I've heard that also, Bonnie, that there's this sort of migration, particularly among those people who have electronic records management, digital preservation skills. There's a greater sort of, well, I'm calling it a migration, but that might not be the right word, in terms of just moving around.
Right.
Yeah.
And I imagine that trend is not going to change.
Sadly, no.
And unfortunately, from the opportunity is looking at when I was looking at the NDSA report talking about content linked to staffing, and just as the content goes up, the more individuals you really sort of need, and that's going to be tough with the challenges we all face. So.
Right.
Okay. Alan, anything else to say?
No, I think I'm going to leave it at that. I would urge everyone to take a look at both the recent CoSA ARM survey and the NDSA survey. I think you get some really good data there to kind of think about as you move forward. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Would you transfer the slides to me?
Oh, yes.
Thanks.
There you go.
Not yet. Oh, there we go. Okay. We've got about 15 minutes left, so if anybody has any questions or comments for any or all of our panelists, please use the chat box.
I will say, Bonnie, this is Ann again, that if any of our listeners today have thoughts about trends that they're seeing, we'd love to hear about them. And again, you're welcome to just jot down some things in the chat box about that. That's important to obviously keep an eye out for trends and sort of anticipate the future, as well as deal with the here and now. And I'd be really interested to hear what you all have to say about that.
Okay. And while we're waiting for questions and comments to come in, it just struck me as I was sitting through this webinar that one of the things that I personally look for when I'm hiring somebody, when talking with the person, reviewing their application materials, so on and so forth. This is not my idea. It's derived from Jim Collins's Good to Great in the Social Sectors, and I'll post information about that in the chat box. Is I look for people who have a modest degree of personal ambition and a substantial degree of ambition for their institution and for the profession at large.
Mm-hmm. That's really an excellent point, Bonnie. I think we also, I know another thing that I look for is people who are optimistic as opposed to pessimistic, that they really do have, sort of a positive view, not only of work, but of life, and so that they're bringing that positivity into the workplace, which can be really energizing for others as well. I see that Liz has got a question.
Yes.
Yeah,
Liz is interested in retaining talent when promotion and raises aren't in her power, and would like us to talk more about nurturing staff and the individual development plans that were mentioned.
Well, I'm happy to kind of kick that off. This is Ann. I think that when promotion and raises aren't in the cards, if you will, if you can provide opportunities for professional development, whatever that may entail, large or small, can be incentives to help employees build their skill sets, keep on top of their existing skill sets, and polish other skill sets so that they're continually learning and adding to their resumes, even though they're not able to advance in an organization. And I think that one way you can get at that is during the annual review, which is as much about looking ahead as looking back, so that when you're reviewing an employee's past year of work, you need also to have that conversation about what's ahead and what that employee is looking for and what you can provide, and that you're mapping out a plan for their professional development in a very concentrated, conscious, intentional way, if you will. And I think sometimes we tend to focus more on their past performance and maybe not enough on the future and what they need and what they're looking to get out of the job going forward. So I've said my piece, and I'll turn it over to Cathy or Alan or Bonnie to weigh in on that.
No, I would agree with that, Ann. We've asked professional staff here sort of what are your interests, what would you sort of be interested in pursuing, because promotion doesn't come very often. I mean, we were fortunate a few years ago when things shifted around that it did, but now we're back where it's probably not going to happen for a while. So one of our archivists took an interest in preservation, so because of our fee fund from land recordings, we were able to use some of that to send him to the NetX Preservation 101 classes, which he's working on right now. So, but finding those opportunities are all gathering. We try to gather as a staff for webinars from the various associations when possible and when funding is available. Or if they're free, then that's great. But and including some of our support staff for some of the more collection care things that they run into a lot. So like there was a webinar a while back on architectural records that we all sat in on, and they were able to learn a little bit more about handling, which was great because now they'll be able to take some of that knowledge and apply it to the work that they do. So,
yeah, I think that's another good thing to consider too is that where a promotion isn't necessarily possible. Maybe that's where the kind of cross-training or cross-discipline experimentation can come in. So it might not be a promotion, but if that person is really interested in an allied kind of field, then they can build on those skills and maybe take on a different role within the organization.
Yeah, I like that idea of cross-training an awful lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's beneficial for the employees and beneficial for the institution. A lot of us, because we have such small staffs, and even those of us who have larger staffs, you might have one or two people who know how to do a mission-critical function. There should be more than one or two people who have that knowledge, because of that, if that one person, has to take extended leave or gets a job elsewhere, the transition might not be smooth. So the more people know, I think it's better for the institution as well as the staff themselves. We have a question here from Barbara Teague to everyone who's attending. Some of the iSchools have gone to online degrees. Does anyone have experience in working with an intern who is working remotely?
This is Alan. We have had interns. So Simmons has some of their program on most or all their program online. Simmons is based in Boston, so they have a remote campus. So we work a lot with interns who don't want to travel to Boston to do their internships. We've also had interns from other programs, some other programs who have been doing a lot more online coursework. So we work with the school and the student to find the project that fits them, and go through the usual evaluations and things, and it's worked out pretty well.
Okay. Yeah, we haven't had any interns working remotely, but we have had a couple of interns from online-only programs, and both of them were very good. You know, had a good, came in with as good a theoretical knowledge as any student I've ever encountered. But we were incredibly aware that we were there face-to-face contact with the profession more intensely than we would have been if they had been taking classes in person. We were kind of their cohort in a way that their online fellow students and faculty often weren't. Okay. Any other questions, comments? It's 2:55, so we do have about 5 more minutes. Okay. Well, I would like to thank you all for participating and attending. Once you close out of the webinar, you will see a brief evaluation survey on your screen. We really do appreciate your feedback. Please take a couple of minutes to complete the survey and help us plan future webinars. We are very much interested in your feedback, and we take it into account when planning future offerings. In addition, please be sure to keep track of what CoSA is up to via CoSA's website, Twitter, or CoSA's Facebook page. And with that, I wish you all a lovely afternoon, and we'll see you next month. Thank you.